Every newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous is told and soon realizes for himself, highlight the next two lines, that his humble admission of powerlessness over alcohol is his first step toward liberation from its paralyzing grip. Okay, just those two little sentences. Top of the page, write, let God fix you. Let God fix you. So it is that we first see humility as a necessity, but this is the barest beginning. To get completely away from our aversion to the idea of being humble, to gain a vision of humility as the avenue to true freedom of the human spirit, highlight to the end of the paragraph, to be willing to work for humility as something to be desired for itself takes most of us a long, long time. A whole lifetime geared toward self-centeredness cannot be set in reverse all at once. Rebellion dogs our every step at first. That's why, these character defects are going to keep popping up on us right and left, and that's okay. We're humans, man. We're going to make mistakes. That's all right. When we have finally admitted without reservation, underline without reservation, that we are powerless over alcohol, we were apt to breathe a great sigh of relief saying, well, thank God that's over. I'll never have to go through that again. Then we learn, often to our consternation, that this is only the first milestone on the new road we are walking. Still goaded by sheer necessity, we reluctantly come to grips with those serious character flaws. Underline serious character flaws, and again write fourth column next to that. We can always keep our fourth step and look at all those check marks in the fourth column that made problem drinkers of us in the first place. And then underline the next two lines. Flaws which must be dealt with to prevent a retreat into alcoholism once again. Right? So they're telling us that if we don't deal with these character defects, and they start to run our lives again, guess what? We're going to be hitting the bottle again, man. So we looked at them in step 4. We shared it with them and somebody in 5. We asked for God's help in 6. Became willing, and we're going to ask Him to remove them in 7. We will want to be rid of some of these defects, but in some instances this will appear to be an impossible job from which we recoil. And we cling with a passionate persistence to others which are just as disturbing to our equilibrium because we still enjoy them too much. How can we possibly summon the resolution and the willingness to get rid of such overwhelming compulsions and desires? Right? Change comes hard to us, man. But again, we are driven by the inescapable conclusion which we draw from AA experience that we surely must, try with a will or else fall by the wayside. At this stage of our progress, we are under heavy pressure and coercion to do the right thing. We are obliged to choose between the pains of trying and the certain penalties of failing to do so. These initial steps along the road are taken grudgingly, yet we do take them. We may still have no very high opinion of humility as a desirable personal virtue, but we do recognize it as a necessary aid to our survival. But when we have taken a square look at some of these defects, write 4 next to that, have discussed them with another, write 5 above that, and have become willing to have them removed, write 6 above that, our thinking about humility commences to have a wider meaning. By this time, in all probability, we have gained some measure of release from our more devastating handicaps. Underline this next sentence. We enjoy moments in which there is something like real peace of mind. I mean, if you notice it, so you live in the moment, and all of a sudden, wow, man, we can get snatches and moments of this peace of mind, right? To those of us who have hitherto known only excitement, depression, or anxiety, in other words, to all of us, underline, this newfound peace is a priceless gift, right? So we're going to get that peace of mind. Something new indeed has been added. Where humility had formerly stood, underline, for a forced feeding on humble pie, it now begins to mean the nourishing ingredient which can give us serenity. Very important. This improved perception of humility starts another revolutionary change in our outlook. Our eyes begin to open to the immense values which have come straight out of painful ego puncturing. Until now, our lives have been largely devoted to running from pain and problems. I underlined that one. That was me. We fled from them as from a plague. We never wanted to deal with the fact of suffering. Highlight to the end of the page. Escape via the bottle was always our solution, right? Alcoholism wasn't our problem, it was our solution. Character building through suffering might be all right for saints, but it certainly didn't appeal to us. Going to write something again at the bottom of the page. Live in the solution. Don't bitch about the problem. Live in the solution. Don't bitch about the problem. Live in the solution. Don't bitch about the problem. And this is true in all aspects. I mean, if you're at work and a bunch of people are standing around, damn, they're complaining about this and that, right? Let's try to find a solution to it and not complain about it. And that's true in all aspects of our life. Live in the solution. Don't bitch about the problem. Then in AA, we looked and listened. Everywhere we saw failure and misery transformed by humility into priceless assets. We heard story after story of how humility had brought strength out of weakness. In every case, underline, pain had been the price of admission to a new life. Next to that little sentence that we underline, write, gift of desperation. Whenever you hear somebody talking about the gift of desperation, that's the only way we become willing to do something, if the pain gets big enough. Gift of desperation. But this admission price had purchased more than we expected. It brought a measure of humility, which we soon discovered to be a healer of pain. We began to fear pain less and desire humility more than ever. During this process of learning more about humility, the most profound result of all was the change in our attitude toward God. Underline that sentence and right next to it write spiritual awakening, or just spirit awake, right? That's a definition of a spiritual awakening a little bit there. And this was true whether we had been believers or unbelievers. We began to get over the idea that the higher power was sort of Bush League pinch hitter to be called upon only in emergency. Next to that, write foxhole, right? Foxhole prayer. The notion that we would still live our own lives, God helping a little now and then, began to evaporate, right? You know, you're asking God for help. Hey, big fella, take a knee. Thanks, right? No, that's foxhole prayers. Many of us who had thought ourselves religious awoke to the limitations of this attitude. Refusing to place God first, we had deprived ourselves of His help. But now the words of myself, I am nothing, the Father doeth the works, began to carry bright promise and meaning. We saw we needn't always need bludgeoned and beaten into humility. It could come quite as much from our voluntary reaching for it as it could from our unremitting suffering. A great turning point in our lives came when we sought for humility. Highlight this, A great turning point in our lives came when we sought for humility as something we really wanted rather than as something we must have. It marked the time when we could commence to see the full implication of step 7. Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Let's write something at the bottom of the page. God reveals more to me the more I seek Him. God reveals more to me the more I seek Him. And then on the top of page 76, we're going to write 2 objectives. 1, live at peace with ourselves and our fellows. Live at peace with ourselves and our fellows. And 2, God can do for us what we can't. Live at peace with ourselves and our fellows. God can do for us what we can't. Live at peace with ourselves and our fellows. 2, God can do for us what we can't. As we approach the actual taking of step 7, it might be well if we AAs inquire once more just what our deeper objectives are. Okay, and there they are, right? So highlight the next 4 lines. Each of us would like to live at peace with himself and his fellows. Right, that's what we just wrote. And then 2, we would like to be assured that the grace of God can do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. We have seen that character defects based upon short-sighted or unworthy desires are the obstacles that block our path toward these objectives. We now clearly see that we have been making unreasonable demands upon ourselves, upon others, and upon God. Okay, so golly, we're going to highlight the whole next paragraph. The chief activator of our defects has been self-centered fear. Primarily, fear that, put a 1 in front of we, that we would lose something we already possessed. or would, put a 2 in front of fail to get something we demanded, right? Keep highlighting. Living upon a basis of unsatisfied demands, we were in a state of continual disturbance and frustration. Therefore, no peace was to be had unless we could find a means of reducing these demands. Okay, you can stop highlighting there, right? So, I mean, I always thought I deserved stuff, man, and I would do whatever I needed to get that stuff, no matter whose toes I stepped on, because I thought I deserved it, right? The difference between a demand and a simple request is plain to anyone. Okay, underline the next 5 lines. The 7th step is where we make the change in our attitude, which permits us, with humility as our guide, to move out from ourselves towards others and towards God. The whole emphasis on step 7 is on humility. You can stop highlighting there. It is really saying that we ought to be willing to try humility in seeking the removal of our other shortcomings, just as we did when we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. If that degree of humility could enable us to find grace by which such a deadly obsession could be banished, then there must be hope of the same result respecting any other problem we could possibly have. So next to the bottom, you can just write 7-step promises. In other words, you know what? They took away the desire for alcohol. God is going to help us with our other problems. Right? So that whole last paragraph, 7-step promises. So I got just a few notes here. I know this was a tough one to get through, but the more I read this, guys, I just love it. This is something that we get better at doing, and we have to work on it and practice it. So, okay, so let's see here. So again, at the top of 76. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Right? He didn't say defects of character. He says things we found objectionable. Hopefully, when we did our 4th and our 5th step, we realized that our 4th column was objectionable and that we didn't like it. These are the wrongs we looked at in the 4th column of our 4th and our 5th step. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate. We saw that these caused us to hurt people. They retaliated against us and we resented them. If we are ready to let them go, we are done with 6. Unfortunately, sometimes we would rather stay with what we know, right? And we stay living in today's pain and suffering rather than take a chance on changing because we don't know what the heck that change is going to look like. So my old toolbox, guys, to get what I wanted, all those things I thought I needed, the good things in life, I would lie, cheat, steal, con, manipulate, right? So if I get rid of my selfishness, right, how the hell can I get what I want? I'm a commissioned salesman. If I get rid of my dishonesty, how the hell can I make a living? Right? If I get rid of my fear, how can I face life? I used fear so I wouldn't have to do stuff that I didn't want to do, and I wouldn't do things that I should have done, right? I used fear for that. If I get rid of my inconsideration, who the hell's going to take care of John, right? So God is going to do for me what I cannot do for myself, but God will not do for me what I can do for myself. So if I want God's help and get rid of my selfishness, I've got to practice selflessness. If I want God to help me get rid of my dishonesty, I must kick myself and try to be honest in every situation. If I want God to get rid of my fear, I must practice courage and do stuff that I'm afraid to do. Right? If I want to get rid of my inconsideration, I've got to consider other people. Now, when I was doing this and working on it, I thought if I did these things, I would not have any personality left if I got rid of these defects of character. They're what made me, right? So if I do get rid of my flaws and defects with God's help, God is actually going to let the opposite flow in. So my mental habits, one of my sponsors, man, he said, your mental habits must be broken by working against myself with God's help. So it's kind of a partnership with God. So I have to try to be more honest, right? I have to try to be more giving. I got to try to be more considerate. And I pray for God's help so I can do that. I cast aside my old ideas and let the new ones take over. 6 and 7 are tools of change and acceptance. 2 little sentences, but perhaps the 2 biggest steps. At the end, I wanted to kill myself because I could not accept what I had become. what I had done and how I was living, right? That was my only way out. So I cannot continue to be dishonest and expect God to take it away. I cannot continue to be selfish and expect God to remove that. I can't continue to be inconsiderate towards others and expect God to take that away. I must practice the opposite of what my nature has been my whole life. I must become different by doing these things, by acting honest, by being selfless, by practicing giving, by becoming loving, and by acting humbly in my affairs. So they're telling me that the old John has to die and the new John has to be reborn. 4 and 5 showed us what we need to change. 6 and 7 is where the change takes place. Again, we work against ourselves. You know, I was commissioned salesman, and I would, for the first year, I would automatically take all these deals that weren't mine. I would have to drive back to the shop and change ownership of the sales and go to these people and say, hey man, this was your sale, I shouldn't have taken it. Now when I do that enough times, I started to just put the sales in other people's names right at the beginning like I should have done, right? If we do these things, we are now responsible for what we are, what we say, and what we do, and how we act. And I cannot blame others because my victimhood is gone. And again, I can change these things with God's help. Steps set 4 through 7, greatest tools to affect change that one can possibly have. So do I want to live in harmony with God or disharmony? Do I want to live in harmony with the world or disharmony, right? 6 and 7 are going to get us to do that. So again, we got to work against ourselves. We got to practice unselfishness. The old habits die. We practice honesty. We practice courage. We practice considering others first. And, you know, somewhere along the line, we're not what we used to be. I will never be completely unselfish, and I'm not always honest. But by God, most of the time, I'm an unselfish, honest human being with courage, considering others first. What a change that is, man. I was never that way. We get to live 2 lives in one lifetime. Most people, whether they're alcoholics or not, they're sick, and they go to the grave not knowing what's wrong with them, right? They're not sure what they want, but they're sure they don't have it, right? They don't know what's wrong with them. With these steps, we get to find out what's wrong, and we get to fix it. We find out in 4 and 5, we change in 6 and 7. You know, but be careful. When you accept steps 6 and 7, you're responsible. So if you stay selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, fearful, and inconsiderate, it's got to be because you want to be that way, right? Or I want to be that way. I can no longer blame other people. I can't blame mommy and daddy anymore. I can't blame the cops. I can't blame my boss, right? So the funny thing that happens, guys, is when you're unselfish, people like you better. When you're honest, you feel better about yourself. Your self-esteem goes up. When you practice courage, you do things that make you feel better. Right? And I discovered, right, for the first time when I'm working these steps that there's real pleasure in considering other people before yourself, right? I didn't know this. How could I know it? Because I never did it before. You know, so I remember, you know, when I was first going through the doing these steps, you know, I took this one big sale, right? You know, it wasn't that big even. It was like a $200 or $300 commission. I put that sucker, it was questionable, but I put that sucker in my name. I was going to make $300-400, right? I'm driving away and I'm thinking, hell no, I am not selling myself out for $300 or $400. I turned around, I went back, and I put that sale in the other person's name. And, you know, I don't do it right off the bat, or I didn't right off the bat, but nowadays I pretty much do it right off the bat. And I feel good when I do it. I feel good when I spend an hour. Somebody comes in, it's like, oh my God, thank you. You know, they made $500. They got to make their mortgage. They're like, thank you for doing that for me. Everybody runs around in AA and they're talking about acceptance. I accept this, I accept that. Acceptance is the key. Well, you know what, man? Acceptance is a process. And it's steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. It's not something we can just get. All right, so almost done. So we're going to think about some new things here in 6 and 7. What can we contribute to life? Less interested in our little plans and designs. We avoid retaliation and argument like the plague. I'm going to empty my head of anger, fear, guilt, shame, and I'm going to let God replace these with love, courage, faith, peace, forgiveness, and goodwill. we're going to discover that our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. We're going to let go of criticism and gossip, and we're going to ask God to show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. And again, God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves, but God is not going to do for us what we can do for ourselves. So, let's go back to page 76, guys. And we're going to now end every session with the 7-step prayer. So let's get on our knees, and we're going to, when ready, we say something like this, right? And that's the way everybody's down. So we're taking this 7-step right now. It's always more powerful when you take it as a group. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. All right, guys, thank you. When we first went through this, when I first code blue, I hated it. But now I love it, so I'm changing.